You're listening to CRM Audio, the Microsoft Power Platform and Business Applications podcast. I'm Joel Lindstrom, joined today by George Sabinski and Shawn Tabor. Gentlemen, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Back
Doing
together, the old crew. It's like old times.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
We time into waves of the releases. Don't
Apparently.
like
CRM Audio 2021 Wave 2.
Did anyone bother reading the notes?
I saw the cover. They look very pretty.
I read parts. I read the service areas and some of the F&O areas.
Yeah. What's listed first? Is marketing first again?
Oh, I have no idea. I clicked the link for service and went right to it. So if it isn't service, I didn't really pay any attention to it.
Does it make sense to follow what's coming in 6 months if it releases monthly? Is it monthly? You get?
Yeah, it is pretty much monthly. Well, and that's an interesting point because the way I use the release notes is kind of an accountability with the product team. I don't really look at it for what's coming so I know how to deploy. It is much more, okay, is this really coming or not? Because as we all know, it could be in the release notes today, but in 2 months it could go away. So
that's true.
You have to take what's in there with a grain of salt. And you also have to, I'm using it as well for things that I expected to be in there as a kind of a tool to go back to the product team and say, hey, I thought this was going to be in here. Like, for example, for field service, one of the things that I expected to be in there was the Windows mobile app, and it wasn't. So I went immediately back to the product team and escalated that. So
what did they say?
But, oh, it's coming.
Yeah, and I think, too, that a lot of Dynamics customers haven't yet got used to the fact that what they think of as Dynamics is not in the Dynamics roadmap. That the Dynamics roadmap is purely the first-party app additions and the core platform of what's coming to dashboards, fields, forms,
right.
App Designer is all in the Power Apps one.
Right. Yeah, it's an odd bird. It's not like the old days when we would, pour through each section of each of the apps and say, "Ooh, look at all this shiny new stuff coming." It is kind of more, okay, maybe this is coming, maybe that's coming, and it's very, I guess it's very fragmented because, to your point, Joel, you really do have to look at the Power Apps and the Power Platform stuff to really get the core goodies.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm still waiting on some things that are coming still for Wave 1, such as the modern app maker, the consolidated putting together Canvas and model-driven apps and that sort of thing, where the preview for that is really Wave 1 of 2021. But yeah, I look at it and see what's coming when we can see Power FX and model-driven apps and that sort of thing.
But even Power FX, it will be a slow drip. There will be a preview of early, experimental features preview, and don't enable it unless you are on, separate machine from your deployment, isolated machine, and then slowly move into preview, sitting there for 2 years, and then releasing with the big asterisk that's saying that, hey, look, but the formulas are not really there. It's everything but formulas, or formulas but everything, or something like that, right? So it will be very, very slow drip, and in a couple of years we'll get there where it will become popular and widespread language, but it will be a long, tedious journey.
What are you talking about, George? Power FX is based in Excel, the world's most common development platform.
You have to look at it like, what do I need to make sure my team is up to speed on in 6 months? Is kind of one way to look at it. With the things that are in preview, how am I getting my people in these previews? Who's looking at the previews? What are we going to do with the information in the previews? how are we going to capitalize on it that as a partner, the next wave, things like that.
I can describe that over the time, the wave release nodes have become what I call squirrel catalog. It's basically a taxonomy of upcoming squirrels.
Okay.
Those
squirrels serve a purpose,
yes.
George, though.
That will be like in 4 months, it will be, oh, look, squirrel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but
look, another one.
But those serve a purpose, though.
Squirrels.
Because, for years, we talked about how Salesforce and Apple and other companies did a better job of raising excitement about products before they came out, or like, hey, we got this Einstein thing coming out. It's going to be awesome. And they would show it in some
I'm not
keynote
saying
or
it's
something.
a bad idea.
But it's also, in products where, frankly, they've been playing catch up, such as when sales was long in the tooth, and they've brought in the sales forecasting. It served a purpose of saying, hey, this has a future. This is what Microsoft's investing in. I agree with you, though. You don't want to bank on the feature in a current deployment. Now, you might, if the preview's there and you tried it, you might give it a try. And so. Yeah, so it's reading. I'll read it out. I'll read it before it comes out, and I'll try some stuff.
Look,
out.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You do need, and specifically in your role, Joel, you do need to know what will be the major attractions and major distractions in 6 months' time, right? Because when you hire people, if you do want to hire people on the leading edge, you do need to give them some of those squirrels. You have to promise them, you have to bake them in. Well, that sounds awful. But you have to bake them into your plan, right? How are you going to keep those people interested and things like that? For example, like the feature, I think it snuck in, the polymorphic lookups. Was it promised in Wave?
I don't think it was. That was just kind of, and it was funny because I had a conversation with somebody at Microsoft, and they said I was actually writing a Microsoft doc about lookups and relationships, and they made a comment in there like, I would change this wording because I'd put in there something about one-to-many and many-to-many and being the two primary kinds of relationships. And they were saying there's a new one coming. And so I was banking on either polymorphic or one-to-one. And we've been MVPs a long time. And George, you remember the times at MVP Summit where there were impassioned pleas where please give us custom polymorphic lookups. And I was going through my mental catalog of projects I've worked on, and I could think of maybe 1 to 2 where a custom polymorphic lookup, or for those who don't know what polymorphic means, multi-entity lookup, similar to the customer lookup or the owner, where you could have it look up to multiple tables. Multi-table lookups would be value. But I also can think of a lot of cases where somebody might use them and then regret it, or it might become sloppy. And in other words, I'm not going to define my data model. I'm just going to make this lookup go to 10 different entities. I don't even know what the limits of the custom ones are. But what I thought of was the most common one is you got some people that are users for internal user people. Some of the people are contacts. You don't want to dump all your users in the contacts. So let's make one that can look up a person. Or I want to do something like build my own resource scheduling, which Shawn would get angry for. But you say you want to have something that could reserve a conference room, a piece of equipment, or schedule a person. That might be a good use case. But other than that, I like defined relationships.
Look, I can tell for sure that over the years, my need to use a true polymorphic lookup, besides the scenarios you outlined, I would add one more scenario. When I do want a custom activity, but I want it to be secured, something like payments, right? when it could be in relation to a lot of things, but I want to have it secured so people can't create payments, for example.
So you're
but
talking like a regarding kind of field.
Yes, precisely regarding, but I want custom activity, but I want it to be secured, because one of the problems with custom activities that they follow general activity security model, right? So, but over the years, I had more need for one-to-one relationships than for
sure. Shawn, you were saying.
I lost my train of thought, so I can't remember where I was going to go, but it's all good. Well, no, here is so okay. So with the example like polymorphic lookup, okay, that is an example of a feature that's not only important to just Power Platform, but also the first party apps as a result of being part of a model driven app, for example, right? So we have gotten to a point where we have segmented the two from Dynamics, customer engagement and all the first party apps and Power Platform, but yet we have features and functions in the Power Platform that are directly related to the first party apps, but they're all presented differently. And I think a lot of makers that cross over both areas could miss out on some of those features, because if, like, for me, I look at the first party app stuff and the Power Platform stuff is more of a afterthought, mainly because I'm expecting you to tell me what's in there. That's good, given our roles. But I think that's a bit of a problem, right? We're getting to a point where the Power Platform really needs to be holistic and not separated. I understand why they did it the way they did it, but we're getting to a point where it's all encompassing, and the first party apps need to be more of the nuanced capability within the platform. Maybe, like purpose driven functionality within the Power Platform for service, for field service, for sales. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
But didn't they take the, let's say, booking engine out, the universal resource?
No,
scheduling?
It's not separate. That's a misnomer. It's not separate, because if you don't have customer service, field service, project operations, you don't get it. So you have to have those first party apps to get to it. Now, can you hook into it from Power Platform? Absolutely. And hopefully they update the release notes and say the API capability is going to be there for October. But no, that's a misnomer. It's not separate.
Yeah, and you have a good point, because like, try and find documentation, even places like Microsoft Learn, for somebody who's a Dynamics customer who wants to know how to configure their Dynamics system. The model-driven app stuff is under Power Apps. The business process flow documentation is now under Power Automate. So good luck making the connection between searching for Dynamics 365 business process flow. Who knows what you're gonna land on. I get why they're doing that, and for the broader platform, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, it's challenging. But I mean, on the polymorphic lookup thing, we've had customer lookups for a couple of years. I don't know what release they were released on. I used to be able to tell you, like, oh, that was in 2015 wave 2 or whatever. I can't do that anymore. But I have only used them like one time, because most 9 out of 10 customers, or maybe even more, either sell to contacts or they sell to companies. There's very few that do both. And so same thing here. I think this is going to be a very important feature for some people, and will be serve good purpose for some people, but will be not necessarily that useful in a lot of cases.
What's the good indicator that polymorphic may be not as wanted as we thought it would be? Can you tell me off the top of your head, what is the default label for parent customer ID field? A column, sorry.
And on what table?
In contact table.
Isn't it parent? No, it's not parent. It's company, I think.
company name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
company name.
Right. So it used to be parent, I think, parent customer.
Yeah.
And now they change it to company name, basically shifting you or pushing you towards accounts. They can't really change the
Well, you
field
never have
because there are a lot of dependencies.
You never have contacts
right,
linked to contacts usually. I mean,
yeah, but what I'm saying is that in hindsight, I think they would have created just a single lookup to a company to an account instead of creating this polymorphic.
I always liked
lookup.
how I can't remember if it's opportunities or cases, but where they give you the customer lookup, but also behind the scenes populate a lookup for either an account or a contact.
That used to be the case on contact.
Yeah.
They would populate 2 fields. They don't do it anymore. That's kind of caught me by surprise about a year ago.
Because that way, if you had a workflow or something that populated that you wanted to make sure it ran when it was related to an account, you could do that, and that was cool.
Look, I do see the good use cases for this. I do. I know in the past there were some occasions when modeling specific things that required either this or that. Having said that, yeah, the need is not very strong. We can always approximate. But back to Shawn's kind of idea that the influence of these fundamental changes, a ripple effect, right? This one is a huge one because the ripple effect will affect Dynamics, will affect Power BI, right? Will affect people who deal with analytics, people who deal with the model in Synapse, and all the reporting, which is important to the business. That will kind of ripple through 10 times more people than a small change. We just changed in the booking engine, we changed this to that, right? Which affects only a limited number of people. This is fundamental change. And I'm surprised. I don't believe it wasn't Wave in release notes for Wave 1.
No, that came out of the blue, and so that's where, again, I don't look
and
at
that's I'm kind of surprised. That's kind of things I would love to hear in advance.
Yeah, I mean, it might be too, and this is just speculating, but it might be there likely was some deep stuff they had to work through to get that to come together and work. And it might be they didn't want to put it out there until they knew it would come together.
That's doable.
Yeah, and I tell you where this will be valuable, and that would be when you wanted to have have some kind of a relationship type table and have multiple record types appear in the same column. What was the only option you really had? It was connections, and connections have not really been changed, and they had a lot of overhead that wasn't great. So it will be good for that. And I can see cases because I'm dealing with more Canvas apps than model-driven apps these days, and I can see how having that be more, because yes, you can make connections work with Canvas apps, but it's not documented. It's not, so having that capability and being able to be more efficient with that, as long as it's used correctly, would be good. Now, George, we started the podcast, and right before we hit record, you said, I want to talk about this topic first, and you immediately went to a different topic. So keep us on our toes. But I think that what you wanted to start the podcast with was the fact that I got off Twitter last week. So
how does it feel?
I did it. It feels good. I've had a lot of angst, not angst about Twitter, but I love-hate relationship, but every time I would go on there, I always left feeling kind of worse than I started, because it kind of, so here's my typical feed. I think I wrote something out about this in an internal chat. You would go on there and you would see somebody, making some kind of snarky comment that wasn't really funny. Then you would have the outrage of the day where people get all up in arms about Tempest in a Teapot that doesn't really matter, and I had no idea what they're talking about. Somebody, very kind of sensory overload because there's just people making all these different statements, and then the mob gets mad at this person because they said something, and it just I feel like anybody who's on Twitter, at some point you're going to be the trending topic where somebody is the mob is coming after you for something that you said that they. Anyway, I didn't find it was adding any value. And then add to that the echo chamber effect where all the self-promotion and then you see 10 other people retweeting the same tweet. I just don't find it very valuable as a channel. I don't find it leads to any real conversations. I feel it leads to a lot more problematic behavior than value. So I did it, and yeah, it feels good. You're not saying I'll never be back, but it's something that I really
look. I use honestly, I use Twitter only as notification channel because every time I wanted to participate in a discussion, I ended up in a darker space than I was before. Right? Twitter is vile.
Yep.
Twitter is very, very toxic environment.
And I asked myself, if I hadn't signed up for Twitter 8 years ago and I was where I am now, would I do it? And the answer was no. And I feel like even things like that, Twitter, no cost to it, but having that out there and being out there, you kind of feel like if you're there, I need to be feeding that. I need to be going. I need to be building my brand, whatever. So. I'm all about asking, is this adding value, and if it's not, cut it off, because there's always that opens up more possibilities to other things.
Well, when I started in Twitter, it was because I was trying to build my brand.
Yeah,
right, and it seemed like that was the only way to do it. Yeah, when I came up with CRM Hobbit, I went right to Twitter because I said, "Oh, that's where to go. That's where everybody's going to talk," and it was good for a while, right, but I agree with that comment. It's not a place for discourse. It just isn't, because it's a great place for discourse if you're saying exactly what everybody else is saying. If you have a different opinion, not the place for it. No one wants to hear that,
right?
And that's disappointing. It's I mainly use it now for honestly entertainment related news. Finding out what's going on. It's not. I use LinkedIn more for community stuff than I do, and I don't use that much either. It's difficult to really find a place where you could really get a message out and have a good conversation, which is unfortunate.
Right.
Interestingly that you mentioned that, Joel, that I watched a video on Power Platform channel, Microsoft One official. And one thing caught my eye, that comments were off. And I thought, that's odd.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the few of those videos in the channel, and the comments were off across all the videos in the channel. The channel has about nearly 50,000 subscribers. And I did post it on Twitter. Honest question.
I didn't see that.
Out of all channels, but because I don't have any other channel to express my surprise, why would you create a community of followers, of 50,000 followers, and wouldn't allow them to engage?
Well, I think there's a couple of thoughts that come to my mind, because I've kind of been on that side, kind of serving as kind of in that PM role for template apps for teams, where we've had posts, I did videos, whatever, and comments are not off on those. So if you look at the Microsoft 365 channel, where some of them are, comments are not off on those, and people will post almost like tech support questions. And so I think what happens is, if you're not going to have somebody actively responding to those, it's better to turn the comments off.
Oh, yeah. Look,
because what happens is the PM,
absolutely,
the PM who recorded that video, or who was the PM at that time, has now at the beginning of the fiscal year been reassigned to some other group, and also in the last year they expanded it to crowdsource a lot of what's in their channel. So a lot of those videos are not made by Microsoft now. And so
I understand. But with 50,000 followers, I think it's a valid channel to dedicate someone to managing the feedback and managing the engagement process. I just give you like out of the blue example. It's very, very different area, right? But nevertheless, it's a good example. So we have New South Wales Police, and they have presence on Twitter. They have presence on Facebook. Not sure about LinkedIn, perhaps. But their media department, someone who looks after those public accounts, is awesome. Absolutely awesome. They engage in, they write on time, they reply. Sometimes they engage into banter between states, like New South Wales Police versus Queensland Police. And it's funny to watch. And, they're very engaging. There are trolls there, naturally, and they react in very conservative manner. They don't engage with trolls, but they do reply to valid concerns, and it's just pleasure to watch. And I'm saying that they have, like on Twitter, I just looked at, they have 190,000 followers, which is a fair audience, right? But they do engage. They dedicated some resources to managing social media, and they do it exceptionally well.
So you're talking specifically the YouTube channel, right?
No. Why YouTube?
Where the comments
platform.
are turned on.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Specifically,
but
YouTube.
There's a lot of other channels where if you want to put a comment in, like technical communities and other places where you can comment, and those are very actively monitored. There's people.
But I want to comment on a specific video. I don't want to comment on video in another channel.
Okay.
I had some thoughts, and I had some comments about specific video, and I found there is no way to comment on that. What do you suggest? I go out there and create a separate topic, discussion topic elsewhere? Which channel?
Okay.
It's like, so I'm surprised. I'm surprised that they're not using this channel. I understand the reasoning behind not engaging. Perhaps noise to signal ratio is way too high for YouTube. Don't know. I don't have 50,000 followers, so I can't comment on that one. But that definitely kind of along the same lines that some medias, some channels are more toxic than others.
Into
and in general,
one of your
social has become more toxic than it was a few years ago. Right, and Twitter specifically vile. I use Twitter only as a notification channel. I don't engage in discussions unless it's just with friends,
Right.
Friendly banter. Overall, I find it exceptionally vile. And look, without specifying political preferences, we all agree that Twitter is very, very biased. It's either left wing or right wing. Moderate are not heard on Twitter.
Well, that's
from either side.
I'm one that doesn't buy into that. Hey, the algorithm is biased. I think the algorithm is set up to reinforce whatever your bent is, and so therefore you're going to see the extremes are going to rise to the top. I think the YouTube comment thing, that's new, because as of like a month ago, I see now the videos, like one of these for the Teams template apps, was getting comments as of a month ago. So there must be some change. You never know. Maybe there were some troll problems, or people.
Maybe it's temporary. Let's hope.
Well,
it's temporary.
but is it less of that, and it's more of people just don't really want. They don't want to have conversations. They want to throw out their opinion in the echo chamber, and they don't want to hear anything back but their own thoughts. Because a good, it's across more than just Twitter. Like if you do a blog post and you have comments turned on,
Discovery.
you're either getting pingbacks, or you're getting bots, or you're getting nasty grams. It's infrequent that you're getting something positive. I saw something this week on Twitter. Eliza put out she puts out great videos, and she also puts blog posts on her videos, right? and one of her videos was apparently the audio wasn't really good, but she clearly posted in the show notes that she had problems with the audio, but here's the blog post to dig in more. And someone posted on Twitter it wasn't good audio and it was really nasty about it. And a number of, our MVP colleagues, kind of rallied around Eliza. But that's what I'm saying, because it's like you're
hold on. But I just had the conversation this morning about that. How many of those colleagues actually commented on YouTube itself?
Oh no, I was
0.
With you.
Well, yeah. 1 because I did comment.
I will admit I did not go onto the video and comment.
So there was a Twitter storm.
Yeah.
Mini storm. People saying, "Oh, there's been blah 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 blah." The problem is they didn't reply to troll. It wasn't actually a troll. It was really angry person.
Right, but what my point is, it's free content. So don't be angry. Be constructive.
Yeah,
don't be angry.
But you've heard something happened, in Minnesota, and you stand up on Eiffel Tower and say, "Hey, that was bad." You guys went to Twitter to channel your anger about, about some troll on YouTube. Why didn't you guys engage on YouTube?
Because this is my point. My own action is defending my point. I fear that there's not a lot of conversation desired. Like at that point in time, I was just angry that someone was mean to Eliza. So in the immediate channel I had, I voiced something. But you're completely correct. What I should have done is went to YouTube. I'm admitting I did the wrong thing, but I think it's more of a symptom of a larger issue, right?
Yeah.
It's not a desire to communicate. I want to be heard. Hear me. I don't care what you're having to say. Hear me, and that's it.
Right.
That's why a lot of social media is ineffective.
So basically, parents 5 years from now will teach their kids saying, "Are you angry? Go to Twitter corner."
I hope not.
Yell. And I admire Joe just choosing not to be angry anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't adding any value to my life. Nothing against people that want to. I would.
But how are you going to tell people that you've got MacBook? No, not MacBook. You've got Mac. And what's more, somehow you managed to convince me to buy one.
Before we get to that, I would say if you don't get off Twitter, I would recommend going to tweetdelete.net and setting up some automated deletion of historical tweets. Again, if you stay on there, that's fine, but there's no value. There's only downside, I fear, from having years and years of Twitter experience, because Twitter tweets out there, because somebody sometime will find something you said and misconstrue it. It'll be politically incorrect 10 years from now or something like that. And then it'll come back and bite you. Tweet delete lets you set up, I think you have to pay a small fee or you do it manually, but you can set up, like, say, every, delete tweets that are over 120 days or 90 days old. So that's the first step. I did that a few months ago, but just wanted to mention that's a very useful tool. So getting to the tools. So let me tell you why I got a Mac originally, which was I found the easiest way to connect when you're doing work for Microsoft. The easiest way to connect to the Microsoft domain is with a Mac. It sounds funny, but if you have a Windows machine that's on the Microsoft domain, that's already connected to any kind of a domain, you can't connect to the Microsoft.com domain. And it just is easier to do it with a Mac. Also with iOS devices, it's very easy with the company
You mean
portal.
Join the domain?
Yeah. If you need to join the network to use, not join the domain, but join your connect to their Intune.
Yeah, you have to surrender a few rights and you have to adhere to some policies. And I agree that it's much easier to do with mobile devices.
Yeah. Yep.
than it is with the desktop computer.
Yep.
And it's going to get in your way on Windows all the time. Yes, I know that. And you're saying on Mac, it's not a problem.
Mac is fairly easy to join and leave. Basically, you install the company portal app, and since that's not normally, I guess you could have it connected to domain, but normally people don't. You can just run the company portal and connect to it. But that's a side note. But also, I like having the flexibility to. I don't like being roped into a certain ecosystem. I'm the crazy type that'll switch between Android and iOS, and I think there's good apps. I found even just nuance of how the same application like Camtasia or Typora or others, the Mac version versus the Windows version, and it's not always one or the other that's good. They'll have certain features that are only in that platform. Maybe there's some native things in Windows or Mac that it can leverage to do that. For example, Camtasia on Windows will transcribe the audio to text for captions, where for some reason the Mac version doesn't. The Typora on Mac, the spell check is much better than Typora on Windows. So anyway, it's just interesting. I just enjoy being able to do that, and I found that generally I can switch between them, and for the things I can't, like XRM Toolbox and Fetch XML Builder, I can use Parallels or some other virtual solution to do that. So yeah, so that's where I was. But again, I and also the M1. I was curious to try the M1, and I found that I really like it. I am not using it in a laptop, so I can't talk to the amazing battery life. But as far as in the Mac Mini, it's a pretty powerful beast. It'll do. I've noticed that it's much more efficient. I've noticed things like Microsoft Teams that on Windows or Intel-based Macs take up a ton of memory, take up much lower memory, and seem to run much more efficiently on the M1. So I don't know what all they're doing, but I like it.
I am curious to try this out. So you did talk me into buying one, and that was end of financial year, so that was a good excuse.
Well, you bought the same. You bought the same monitor I have. Now you just had to buy the same computer I have too.
Yeah,
George and
absolutely.
I have the same ultra wide monitor.
What I am curious now, what would be a performance difference between my very grunty, I've got i9 custom built with 64 gig of RAM, very powerful machine, but it comes with the noise, right?
Yeah.
You can probably hear it in background if you kind of listen hard enough when I'm not talking, then you can perhaps hear the hum. It's very nice noise, but it's still a noise.
So I've got a question for you. On your i9, 64 gigs of RAM, what are the things you're doing that really need that much RAM? Because I don't have on my Windows machine. I think I've got more than 16, but I don't have 64. But
video editing is primary.
How many videos are you rendering at the same time? Because you're using Camtasia.
No, it's not about rendering. It's about editing video, and it consumes to have a smooth editing experience. The more, the better.
Right, but isn't there a limit to what it will use? I mean, because are you editing computer graphics and or just yourself talking?
I have. How many browser profiles you have?
I think I have 8, 9.
Yeah, I've got 3 of my own. So it's like company, personal, and test environment or demo environment. And then I have one per customer. I'm actively working with, means another, 6 to 10, depending on time of the year, I suppose. So I end up with something like a dozen of profiles, and each profile accumulates bazillions of tabs. And in the end, when I look at the memory, it just gets power hungry.
But you have all those you have all those open at the same time.
32 gig of RAM or 16, the operating system would balance it out.
Right.
It's kind of beast that it will eat whatever you give it. And I probably won't notice a performance difference, but at the price point where it literally was a difference of something like $30 between getting 64, getting 32, I wouldn't even think twice about it.
Right.
I can run VMs, I can run these, I can run 2 monitors, I can run 7 monitors. Really, it's kind of you buying more than you can handle.
Right. I just haven't found the need to have that much, and I do. I mean, I'm not rendering code or doing deep Visual Studio stuff, but I don't really feel. This is what I ask developers when they talk about how they need massive, large laptop with 64 plus gigs of RAM and all this. And I say, what are you doing that needs all that memory? Because again, I think video editing, gaming is the thing that takes up the most resources, and no gaming PCs. Yeah, if you don't have it, you'll suffer if you're running the latest.
But it's more about video cards, video cards than running memory. The experience slightly smoother. The more memory you have, and as I said, at this price difference, it's just not worth even think about it.
Yeah, but again, I think that's where the M1 I'm finding is more efficient, or seems to be. And if I look at my amount of memory in usage and running the same browser profiles, because I got Edge on both of them and I've got Teams on both of them. Teams, Edge, Chrome, all these things are consuming less memory on the M1 Mac than they are on either I have an older Intel Mac laptop and I've got a Surface Studio, and it's consuming less than on either one of those. So they're doing something right.
I haven't gotten a chance to even get that far in trying a Mac. My daughter has went through 2 MacBook Pros and 1 MacBook, and the thing I like about the Macs that I've seen so far is the hardware seems to last a lot longer in a viable capacity than a PC does, especially for laptops. But every time I've tried to get that MacBook Pro back from her, she said no because for some reason, and then gives it away to her boyfriend. So there you go. That's been my lot. Even though I paid for the MacBooks, but whatever.
Is that how you count in her boyfriends?
Well,
she had 2 MacBook Pros. It means 2 boyfriends. How does that work?
Well, 1 MacBook Pro she has to keep, so it's only been the 1 boyfriend that she's given the hardware to. So.
I have to say, my wife still has MacBook. She's got working computer, which is X1, right? ThinkPad. And I have to admit, I've got one too. Long story, but I've got one, and it's a work of beauty. And I give a thumbs up. Even I would place it ahead of Surface. I've got Surface as well, Surface Book, and I would say that the selling point of Surface Book, the detachable screen, doesn't actually work in reality. I never detach it. Very rarely I did. So X1 is a work of beauty, but she has this, I think, 10 years old MacBook Pro, one of the Mac Air, one of the first generations or something, right? And she still uses it. She watches YouTube and it, does shopping and browsing on it. And every time I try to replace it with something new, I said, you need to upgrade, you need something new. And she refuses. She says, why? It works just fine. It now runs, I think, less than an hour on the battery itself, but plug is always nearby, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, longevity is amazing. I can't think of Intel laptop 10 years old that I would still run.
Yeah, and you got to give it to them too. They support backwards, at least on OS X. They support backwards compatibility for updates too. I mean, you can upgrade, 5+-year-old Mac where you probably aren't going to a 5-year-old Windows computer. Although if it's well built and it was cutting edge back then, you may be able to. So, yep. So that's the story there. But again, I think there's George,
Interesting.
I made the comment. I made the comment yesterday.
One.
Yeah, I made the comment last week that an honest review of most computers and phones and things like that would be, when it comes down to it, they all pretty much do the same thing. And I would say the same thing. There's a lot more similarities than there are differences here, and it's almost like we're to a point in computers where operating systems don't quite matter as much. Although there are applications that you have to have Windows or have to have Mac for, but generally speaking, most of the stuff you can do the same. So,
my curiosity is also in trying Final Cut versus Camtasia. I think it's a wrong comparison, but I just want to try Final Cut to see how easy or more difficult the editing is, because I'm kind of find some of the things in Camtasia bit cumbersome. When I want some smooth effect or something like this, I find it's very rugged. It's kind of like a Ford pickup truck. Don't look for finesse.
Well,
it's a utility.
Camtasia defaults to like a fairly low frame rate, and yeah, you can go whatever from 30 to 60. But
no, it's not about frame rate. It's about utilitarian nature of Camtasia. It does the job, and it does it really well.
And
but
it's also optimized for screencast, for recording your screen, where a lot of the others are more for I'm making a movie or I'm editing a video of people. And those you need more like 4K or whatever if you're showing your screen and a demo of how to build a Power App. That's overkill. But if you're showing your face or showing people or action or sports or things like that, then I think there are other tools.
Oh, well, we'll see. So what's new in software?
What do you mean?
How you tell the difference now that you run in Windows 11?
Oh yeah, so
Mac,
I upgraded my computer, my Windows computer, Windows 11. Just want to try it, and I like it. There's nothing really groundbreaking about it. One thing that is relevant to
come on, you take that back. The chat app is amazing.
I like the. You know what? The icons kind of made me think of. I don't know. It's been a long time. Back in like the 90s, I tried IBM OS 2 for a little bit, but right before Windows 95 came out, and something about them, the icons, maybe they're smaller or something like that. You got colored folders.
I always said OS 2 was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing that's relevant to our audience, which is, I think something that could have a big impact is Power Automate Desktop comes as a feature of Windows 11. You just get it. And that is interesting to me because that is compared to like Mac Automator and some of the other things that are in other operating systems. Windows basically will now have as part of it probably the most powerful out-of-the-box kind of macro engine. I mean, there's some really powerful stuff you can do with that. I don't feel like Power Automate Desktop has got the love from the Flow family yet, and I think that people are scared of change and scared of new things. But I think this could be. I don't want to use the overly used game changer phrase, but I think this could be interesting because considering the audience that Windows has compared to Power Platform people, this could mean that in a couple years, when people hear Power Automate, they think desktop flows before they think cloud flows. I think that's going to be really interesting. And also,
and on that note,
could make Microsoft. I think Microsoft is really trying to eat the lunch of Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and others, and make Power Automate Desktop the default for RPA.
And that's a good differentiating factor because when it comes to cloud flows or cloud automation, there are products popping up, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but on a regular basis that open source, and it's just amazing in their capabilities. And I just mentioned that because UI, my user experience in that product was, I hate to say it, but it was superior to Power Automate user experience. The product is, I don't even know how to say it. It's N for November, 8 November.io. So it's N8N.io.
N8N?
N8N.io. Okay. And it's a Cloudflow workflow automation. Same principle. It passes JSON around, so it's kind of easy to build extensions, connectors, using very, very similar principles to Microsoft Power Automate. There is nothing groundbreaking in that part, but the UI, it's more concise, and I found it to be just more pleasant to work with.
It looks, the UI I'm looking at now, the UI looks like more of a classic BPM type layout.
And it works.
Like if you look at products like Bazagi and others, it looks a lot like that.
But this one open source, you want to run it, you run it in a Docker.
Okay, it's cool.
I can spin off the engine to run this thing with one line command line. Seriously.
Right. And I mean, when it comes down to it, the question is, does this platform connect to the services that I want to connect to it? I mean, look at Zapier. There's a lot of people using Zapier for stuff still, and I don't think it's not the market leader out there, but there's things that will connect to. I mean, I still use IFTTT. I mean, in my move away from the social media like Twitter, I want to fight the algorithm and kind of seed my own kind of feed, if you will. And so I've settled on Pocket because it's good and it works. For example, I've got an e-reader, like an e-ink e-reader that will take a feed from Pocket. So IFTTT has a connector to Pocket, so I can basically set up like an RSS feed going in there, and suddenly those articles are on my e-reader. So yeah, so this looks really good. So again, I think there's room for other players.
No, but what I'm saying is that the principles of cloud automation are very similar, if not identical. And the differences are very subtle between vendors, right? This one is open source. Zapier has thousands, I'm not sure thousands, but over 1,000 of connectors, definitely. I had to automate some accounting, which is zero based, and there's no zero connector in Power Automate.
Yes,
so I switched to Zapier because I can't be stuffed at this point in time to write zero connector, right? Custom connector. So, and it's already there and it's working. So I'm saying, yeah, okay, whatever. I'll use that. It really, the point, the differentiation is kind of, if I need to write Power Automate that's going to run, 30,000 runs an hour, I'm saying I'm not going to pay those silly license fees. I'll spin off my Docker instance of this N8N, and scale it as I need to without paying month-to-month licenses. I scale it for a day, run bazillions of automation flows, and then scale it down. That gives me flexibility. But when it comes to desktop, that's where the game begins to change. And you're right. Presence of Power Automation on the desktop would be a differentiating factor for me if I need to flick and start seamlessly pass parameters to a cloud automation, because it will be a low friction to start Power Automate flow from the desktop flow, right?
Right. So go to Power Automate and click connectors and take a look at the connectors. First of all, we now have over 500 of them, but you'll see a bunch of connectors that have the same icon, which is to like kind of like the two stick people. That's what's going to really make things interesting, which is independent connections.
Yes.
There's now
Finally,
HubSpot.
Microsoft allows what's called independent connectors. So you don't go through the full certification process. You do adhere to some milestones. Your connector is still validated, but it doesn't go through certification process. But the difference is it will show up in a list of public connectors, right? So you publish it, you open source it. There is a well-defined process to do it, but the fundamental difference, I think, is that when you do a certified connector, you have to own the service you connect into.
Right.
And the reasoning was quite sound, is because to guarantee any kind of SLAs, Microsoft need direct connection to a vendor who runs the service. Okay, so when you certify a connector, you own the service, you can connect to it, and that's all we can find. But then Microsoft is kind of faces a dilemma. How do you create a zero connector? Zero would go back and say, we already have Zapier connector. We're not interested in creating Microsoft connector. So Microsoft is stuck between rock and a hard place in trying to convince those vendors to create their own full connectors. Some connectors are half-baked as a result, and so on. So this program allows you to create connectors to a third-party services that you don't own. And you don't have to guarantee SLA. So I can go in and create a zero connector, for example, to a zero. For those who don't know, zero, it's an accounting system, popular accounting system, similar to QuickBooks. So it's a cloud accounting system, very popular in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and I think it's becoming popular in US. So I can create connector to the zero accounting and publish it, and it will become available, but I don't own the service. Right, so that's a difference between certified connectors.
That's where you see some of the connectors, like the Jira ones. There's already a Jira connector, but it's extremely limited. Where the one, and full disclosure, Hitachi was involved with that, so I know about that as well as some of the other ones coming out. Offers a lot more capabilities. So yeah, this is exciting. And also, if you look at all the other, Microsoft has been a little bit unusual in that if you look at the Microsoft connectors, they're all Microsoft first party or have been. Whereas if you look at Appian, OutSystem, all these other low-code app platforms, their connectors are all community, or they have a store where partners sell connectors. So this is going to really, I think, help this explode if it takes off. And really make the connectors better, I feel. So I don't know, if Microsoft is going to still be as active in creating connectors, or if this takes off, will we see the majority of connectors in the future be independently produced? Because they're still verifying them, they're still validating them to make sure they're not just sticking junk in there. But it's going to, I think, really expedite this.
The difference is. Yeah, there are some subtle differences. If I am creating a zero connector, and I am running zero, right? So I'm the owner of the API. What I can bake into my connector is things like throttling.
Right.
Whilst public connector would just give up. I can create, independent would create a connector and wouldn't handle this throttling properly and would just kill over if automation tries to connect or retrieve too much or connect way too often to the service. So there are some advantages of being vendor. Obviously, you can fix things and so on.
Right.
But you're right. It opens up a whole new. My prediction is connectors would hit 1,000 in about 6 to 8 months time.
Right. There's nothing saying that you could, if you're an ISV, you couldn't take that zero connector, say there's one in the store, and extend that, add pieces to it, have solutions built using it. So I think it's going to be really healthy for the ecosystem. Next
time, I'll give you a full report on M1, my experience at setting it up.
Step 1, get it out of the box. Step 2, did you buy the Apple, like the official Apple keyboard for it and mouse, or are you using a Bluetooth?
I'm using Logitech.
You're going to have to have a corded keyboard and mouse to set it up. because
I do have corded keyboard.
It doesn't give
I'm
you
not sure
the ability to connect Bluetooth, or I didn't find it before you sign in, and so that's kind of
What about Apple keyboard? If I do have one,
I think if you have an Apple keyboard, it will work. Now, if it's already connected to something else, I don't know. But that's the biggest pain I have is I have to keep a corded keyboard around just because. But since I'm just working from my desk now and not traveling, I kind of feel like cordless mice and keyboards when you're sitting at the same desk are kind of pointless. You're just using batteries for no purpose unless you're moving around with your computer. And my son is into gaming PCs and he thinks corded mice and keyboards are cool now. So I may just stick with a corded mouse and keyboard.
Cords are back in business.
Join us next time.
Talk to you later.